So I just showed, now, and I want to be very specific here because I know China chats can go everywhere, but I want to talk about McGowan and his comments about China, trying to throw in sort of federal government somehow screwing up the economy because it's racking up generations of debt that are, of course, keeping Western Australians in a job, having welfare safety nets that work. One more time, here is Michael McGowan essentially backing in what the WA billionaires want, which is don't offend China.
Western Australia keeps the national economy and the national finances alive. But for us, the country would be underwater. And I don't think the eastern states fully appreciate that. We keep the national economy alive. Our trade keeps the national income alive. Our company tax revenues keep the federal budget alive. The country would be in severe trouble but for Western Australia. And so we perhaps understand trade with other countries better than they do in Melbourne or Sydney.
Well, the opinion poll said that, 89% of people were happy with his coronavirus response. He's out there to burn enough capital and he's got enough points before he goes to even second, let alone Palaszczuk levels at 55. Bronwyn, what does it say to you that a leader of a state, at a moment like this, when we're having this back and forth with China, where Australia's trying to stand up, turns around and backs in the billionaires who, of course, pay so much tax in his state, but do so because of the money they get from China?
Well, why would you be surprised? This is a socialist premier backing up the Communist Party of China, and premiers and businessmen have to get used to the idea that this is against the national interest and Australians want their independence back. Now, I said long before anybody else said, and now they've copied it and saying it too, that China deliberately sent the virus and the fear of the virus out of China into the free world. And it's been able to see just how long it takes to bring the free world to its knees. Now, and then the rest of it started. Then we had the propaganda saying, no, 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 it wasn't China it came from, it was the US. Then we had the next step, which was to say, oh, well, we are the ones who can solve this problem. And having already gone around the world and scrounged up masks and tests and everything, protective gear from all around the world, they then said, oh, well, we'll send you some gear from China, which we'll sell to you. Of that, about 9 countries have had to return it all, scrap it and not use it because it is not up to standard or it's even contaminated. After that, we've seen here in our own country, the diplomat from China threaten Australia and say we won't send students or tourists to punish you. China wants us to be a vassal state. What does that mean? It means it wants our resources and our food, but it wants us to pay homage. It wants us to prostrate ourselves to China and thank them for allowing us to even live in our own country. Now, it's just got to stop. And the next step has got to be what the federal government is going to do to ensure that we are no longer so dependent upon China. Now, we've all had to suffer in this country. All the ordinary people have had to suffer having their wages cut, losing their jobs, honestly terrified about where their next mouthful is going to come from. And believe me, talking to people like the Salvation Army, I know that very well. So what we are seeing are 2 billionaires complaining that they might lose some of their trade. Well, Australia is not for sale. And we have to ensure that the policy making of the federal government means that Australia can again find new markets. Let's look into other areas. Let's look back at the UK, who used to be a major partner with us. We had to diversify when they joined the European community, and we were they were a major trading partner. There are all sorts of areas, Central Europe we can look at. But if we don't make that decision that Australia is not for sale and say that we have to diversify our trade so we are not 38% dependent for our exports to China, then we will lose our independence. And the Australian people didn't allow our last generation to fight World War II to see us become a vassal state to the Communist Party of China.
Agree completely. I agree completely. Look, I mean, Stephen, you're one of the more sensible people on the centre-left of politics about China, and I don't say that as a backhander or a smartass. You've always had a strong position here. Look, I understand McGowan and the rock and the hard place, theoretically, that he is in, but in the same way that Morrison had to fight against muscle memory to achieve many of the things that have now worked, surely some Labor leaders, or dare I say just this one, and we'll work our way around the country, need to do the same as well.
Look, there's a couple of different points to be made. Firstly, McGowan actually supported the inquiry. So I think it's you need to put that into the discussion. He didn't dismiss Scott Morrison. He didn't play Team Red and Team Blue. He actually backed the inquiry. And Penny Wong has backed the inquiry, and Albo and the team. So it's not a red and blue issue. Yes, he's in a rock and a hard place. As I think the report said, 25% of the economy of Western Australia is now dependent on China. That's an unhealthy reliance, no question. I would say to Bronwyn, I agreed with much of what you said, but I think you diminish the arguments about China when you say they did it deliberately. There is no proof and no evidence.
There is. Yes, there is. And the proof is this. It closed down its domestic airlines and wouldn't let the people travel in China, and then filled the planes and sent them with people infected with the disease into the free world. That's
Seriously,
how it got
Bronwyn, I mean, you're the only person in the country who could make me look like I'm defending China. Seriously. Almost everything else you said, I would largely agree with. But when you say they did it deliberately, as if it was a Communist Party directive to do this,
it was a Communist directive to say, let those planes go.
You discredit the argument. China are doing enough to discredit themselves. Their bullying, their arrogance. I mean, the Chinese media in the last 24 hours have described Australia as a bit of gum on your shoe. Australians need to understand what China really thinks about Australia, because we stand up for our values. And nothing encapsulated what they really think. They'll, as you said, they will take our food, they will take our minerals, they will take our resources, but that's what they actually think. They went a long way to subverting through their interference, both in cyber attacks, in their influence peddling, their supporters that they've had on the payroll directly and indirectly. They've done enough to discredit themselves. So keep the argument around things that are factually able to be demonstrated. Don't add to wild conspiracy theories.